Have you ever wanted to get booked on somebody else's podcast? Have you maybe even tried cold emailing potential podcasts to get on those podcasts? Well, watch this video for the 10 lessons that I learned after 1 year of sending out over 1,000 emails to connect and get booked on other people's podcasts. For the best leadership tips, entrepreneurship advice, and subconscious success strategies to help you stand out fearlessly, build your empire, and crown yourself, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and make sure you hit the bell so that you're notified every Tuesday and Friday when a new video goes live. Hey there, I'm Kimberly Spencer, high performance coach and founder of crownyourself.com. And after going on over 200 podcast interviews and having my own podcast, The Princess and the Bee, doing over 100 interviews on that podcast, I have learned some serious do's and don'ts coming from a guest perspective on how to reach out and connect to get booked on other people's podcasts. First, a little backstory. Back in 2020, when the world went on lockdown, my primary source of lead generation of creating experiential workshops was shut. So I had to pivot quickly, and one of the ways that I thought of pivoting was going on other people's podcasts. I remembered a podcast that I had been on a year prior that had resulted in a $10,000 client. And so I thought, well, what if I could replicate that? What if I just went on more people's podcasts and was able to use those experiences to then create lead generation for my business? Fast forward less than a year later, in only 9 months and 50 interviews, we generated $70,000 in new business revenue. Now, part of our strategy in being able to get those 50 interviews included reaching out to potential podcasters. Now, as a podcaster myself, I get tons of pitch emails and potential emails for people to come on my podcast, The Princess and the Bee. So from both a receiving end of being a podcaster receiving pitches and from a giving end, I've seen a few do's and don'ts of what you want to be doing if you're going to be reaching out to podcasts via email to try to get booked on those shows. So here are my 10 lessons learned from over 1,000 emails to potential podcasts. Lesson number 1, don't make it all about you. So if you have a person, an agency, or a marketing representative who's pitching on your behalf to another person's podcast, that is a little different than if you're doing the reach out yourself. If you make that initial email all about you, and as a business owner, I get these emails all the time. I don't have time, no offense, to read 4 paragraphs about how amazing you are. I'm sure you're amazing. I'm sure you're awesome and you're awesome at what you do. And if that's not what I'm looking for right now, then it's really not going to work for me to read through your email. It's just going to get quickly replied to, no thanks, bye. So what I found, because initially we started sending out an email that was more pitch-like, of sharing all the things about me and how I help my clients and where, being featured in Forbes and all of these other credentials, but no one cared and no one responded. Well, not no one. We had a very little response. When we shifted our strategy into making our initial email or initial point of contact about the other person and what they're doing and what they're creating, it changed the game and it changed the percentage of responses that we were getting. Inside of my program, Communication Queens, I share with my Communication Queens the exact emails and swipe files that we use that have garnered an 80% response rate. So if you want to get in on that program, just jump in on the waitlist below. Lesson number 2, short and simple wins the day. So when you are reaching out to another business owner or another podcaster, assume that the other person is busy. Assume that they have a very full life and that their priority is their own life. It's not yours. And so if you can craft a quick, short, pithy email that addresses something that they're needing, make it simple and short and sweet and to the point. 15 paragraphs ain't gonna do it. Keep it short and simple. 1 to 2 tops 3 sentences, and that's it. And by 3 sentences, I mean the third sentence can basically just be, thank you for your time. Thank you for your response. Thank you for your, for reading this. You know, that because it's an initial email, it's an initial reach out, be grateful that they even read it. So often, many people don't read cold emails. And so if they're just reading it, thank them for their time and don't take too much of it. Lesson number 3, first impressions matter. So when I first started our email reach out strategy to podcasts, I was doing it myself. And that worked until I just was a little overwhelmed doing it with having a 2-year-old at the time and navigating all the other pieces of serving my current clients. So I delegated it and I hired an assistant. But I made sure that when I delegated it, that the first impression, that the email was structured in a way that it looked nice. It had a nice letterhead not letterhead. It had a nice email signature on the bottom, making it so it looks like a professional email. Our email signature also includes a link to my TED Talk, a link to websites, social media presence. So if the podcaster is interested, they can easily click those links below, and it shows that we do have a social presence. Plus, it shows our logo and the title of the company, so it has a very nice structure to it. And if you want to use the same software that I use for our email signature, it is just mailbutler.io. So I'll put that link in the description below. Lesson number 4. Not everybody is going to like you, and you will not be a right fit for everyone. So because my assistant does the initial reach out connecting with podcasts, I don't normally see the rejections, but sometimes I do when I go through our list of looking at what podcasts are interested, what podcasts are not, what podcasts were like a wait until later, what podcasts were like a hell no. And one time, as I was preparing our bonus for Communication Queens, which if you sign up for the Communication Queens program, you get access to 1,111 publicly sourced podcasters' emails that you can start your initial reach out to initially, we have reached out to personally. Now, like I said, I am not a fit for everyone. You are not a fit for everyone either. And so as I was looking through this list to curate this bonus for our Communication Queens, I saw this one person that just was pretty snarky about his response. And I was like, I'm going to check out who this person is. And I looked and I saw that this person was very much not in alignment with our brand. This person was a man, an older man, who had a very polished, very structured, very, in the terms of like business, corporate world, professional persona. Now, that's not to say that I'm not professional, but I do come off as sparkly, bubbly. I have a much stronger feminine side to me, and I don't resonate so much with certain companies that like to keep everything in this buttoned up professional box of this is how business should look. I'm much more authentic, transparent. That's just my style. And immediately when I saw this gentleman's website, I was like, thank God for the rejection, because I know that it would have been a waste of my time and of his had I gone onto his podcast, because his audience probably doesn't reflect the audience that I have as well. So it wouldn't have been a good fit anyway, and it would have been a waste of our time. So you're not going to be a fit for every other person's podcast, even if you talk about similar things. Like his podcast was all about entrepreneurship. I talk a lot about entrepreneurship in The Princess and the Bee on becoming the queen bee of your business. But my strategy is very different. My approach, my style is very different, and it's not a fit for everyone, and that's okay. By them saying no and rejecting you from coming on their podcast, it opens up a huge door of opportunity, freeing your time to go on people's podcasts who have an aligned audience, who have an audience that would love how you speak, your stories, your services, your brand, and the experience of who you are. Be grateful for the rejections because they are a gift. Lesson number 5. Have your message and your media aligned. So Like I said, your brand may not be for everyone, but if you're saying that you speak on this and your media, meaning either your one sheet or how you show up on social media, is not really reflecting this that you're preaching, then you may need to adapt the media of your one sheets or your website or certain things about how you're presenting your brand online to match the message, or shift the message to match the media. So, for example, when I looked at the amount of podcasts that were saying no to me, that gave me a powerful feedback to look at our media one sheet. The one sheet was something that I had created 2 years ago that was much more about claiming your power and having confidence versus doing that in a business setting, which I speak to more entrepreneurs now. So instead of how the one sheet used to look, I simplified it, changed it up a bit, added some elements of sharing that I was a TEDx speaker, sharing some different things that I now talk about in podcasts and on shows now, and pivoted the messaging a little bit and the branding style, not changing who I am or how I show up, but just pivoting those initial points of content of how I talk, what I talk about, and the overall experience of what my brand will be. So the message and the media were both in alignment. And I'll show you 2 examples of what that looked like. So this one was the old one, and this one is the new one. Can you see the difference? One is very sparkly. It's a little crowded with text. It was me a few years ago just whipping it up on my own. The second one is a little bit more polished, a little bit more white space. It's not having to prove myself so much because I already have enough accolades, success, and achievements under my belt to not really have to cram so much into one media sheet. I actually trust myself a little bit more in it having a lot more white space because I don't need to fill that space with, let me show you how awesome I am. I already know how awesome I am. Not to... And if you want to learn how to brag about yourself without being a narcissistic asshole, definitely watch this video next. So we've covered your email messaging, your one sheets, your media, your messaging in general. Now, step number 6 is knowing that interacting with you or your company is an experience. It's a holistic experience. So for example, I no longer do the initial reach out to podcasters. That's something my amazing assistant Joanna does. However, how she communicates is a reflection of the brand. And so in order for me to make sure that the brand and Crown Yourself as a whole is being represented in the way that I wanted to, I provided her with some email templates and scenarios and things of what she could say or examples to really create an experience so that people know that when I'm coming onto their podcast, we are professional, we have our shit together, and they will be getting a full experience. It's kind of like when you're setting up to go on a first date. That podcast, that experience is like the first date, but there's all the communication that goes on behind the scenes before the first date even happens. And that is part of the whole experience, whether it's positive or negative, that can have an influence on the experience that you have on the podcast. So being able to show up with generosity of spirit, caring about the podcaster, caring about their time, being respectful of the other person, these are all pieces that go into the experience that someone receives by having you on your podcast. So be mindful of the experience that you are providing when people are interacting with you. Lesson number 7, the scheduling dance is real. So every podcast is different. All 2.3 million podcasts that are currently available on Apple Podcasts right now, every single one of them will have a different process. Now, in this video, I do refer to podcast tips that as a guest, I love after having been on over 200 podcasts. So these are automation tips that make it so much easier for you to book your guests. For example, in our podcast guest booking process, we use Calendly. Calendly allows us to automate that process so it simplifies the rescheduling. Otherwise, you're left with going back and forth on doing this like scheduling dance. And that is not something that this mama has time for with 2 boys under 5. So fortunately, I have an assistant who I've delegated that scheduling dance to, but that scheduling dance still happens and I'm still paying her for her time to do that. So either you're going to be dealing with it or an assistant or a virtual assistant's going to be dealing with it, but somebody's going to be doing the scheduling shuffle. So trust that the process that is happening, it will happen. It can feel frustrating, so I prefer to take that frustration off of my plate and delegate it. Lesson number 8. Because every podcast is different, podcasters have different recording softwares. So for example, we use Zoom for our primary recording software because we use Zoom for everything. We use Zoom for our coaching calls, for our Communication Queens calls, for our webinars, and of course we use it for booking podcasts. So with Zoom, it automates and integrates beautifully and sweetly into Calendly. So because of that automation, when guests book to come on to The Princess and the Bee, they automatically get their own Zoom link that they can use. That is private, that is not a public thing. It's not using my own private Zoom link. That keeps the process a lot more streamlined. So they have the Zoom link way in advance from the immediate time that they book the podcast. Now, not every podcast scheduling service, recording service is equal. So some, like StreamYard, that many podcasters use, it only will populate a link within 7 days. So some podcasters like to give the link 5 minutes before the podcast. Personally, as a mom and a business owner, I'm going from either back-to-back meetings or driving my kid to soccer and then going into a meeting. So I'm not checking my email every 5 minutes before a podcast, before an interview. And I don't like diving into my inbox. I batch schedule my inbox time to go into my inbox to actually look and respond to emails. So going in 5 minutes before, it can be distracting for me. That's one strategy that I don't like, but it happens. So if you are a podcaster, if you do send the email 5 minutes before, at least have some form of process that you know that this, or put it in your calendar, or like we teach in Communication Queens, we have a whole guest podcasting Trello board that we give you so that you are able to track where the recording links are so that you can easily go into them. And so my assistant Joanna, when she books the podcast, she will put in the notes of our Trello that either the Zoom link, the StreamYard link, or the fact that the podcaster sends the link 5 minutes before, and then I need to go dig into my email inbox to be able to find it, which I don't really like that much, but sometimes that happens because not all podcasts are created equal. So the experience will be different for every single one. Lesson number 9, time zones and daylight savings time are a real thing. So this is why I like using automated booking schedulers like Calendly or Schedule Ones or Acuity, because they automatically adapt to your time zone. So for example, when I was living in Australia and doing podcasts in the Netherlands, in New York, in Los Angeles, all of those time zones had to be accounted for. And what my Queen team and I have found is that probably about 60% of podcasts don't have an automated scheduler. And so you will be navigating both daylight savings times and time zone changes. So I've included the link below for the time zone converter that we use in order to make sure that we're always booking at the right time on the right date for everyone's time zone. Because like, for example, when I was living in Australia, I was a day ahead of the podcaster, typically if the podcaster was in the US. So you want to be sure that you're not showing up at the wrong place in the wrong time, or the podcaster showing up at the wrong place in the wrong time. So you want to make sure your time zones are clear, concise, and under control. If you use an automation software like Calendly, it does give your guests the opportunity to book it in their time zone, which makes it very convenient and fast for them. But if you don't use an automated service like Calendly or Acuity or Schedule Ones, then you will be needing needing to use a time zone converter to be able to navigate that. And also make sure that you use the date converter so that if you are in a state that has daylight savings time or in a country that has daylight savings time, so Australia had a different daylight savings times than the US did, and that was a whole scheduling shenanigan. So making sure that you have understand daylight savings times and scheduling with time zones. Click the link below to use that time zone schedule. Just save it to your bookmarks in your web browser. And with that being said, if you are scheduling for months in advance, like let's say we're scheduling for November and for fall, because some podcasts don't record for a season and then they'll batch record and they'll record their next season recording batch will start in the fall or in March, then you want to be aware of that daylight savings time shift and based on the state and the time zone that the podcaster is in. So the links to use for that are down below. We use time zone converter and it is fast and it is free and it is easy. So make sure you are on it with the time zones. And lastly, lesson number 10, fortune is in the follow-up. So, like I said, podcasting can be a powerful lead generation strategy. It can be a profitable lead generation strategy, connecting with podcasters, connecting with their audience, and building that relationship is so powerful and so profitable for your business. But not always, like I said, will a podcaster be an immediate yes. Sometimes they record in seasons, which means that they may not be recording right now when you reach out to them. Sometimes they'll say circle back in 6 to 9 months. Sometimes they'll say, we love her, but we're fully booked with 80 episodes in the can right now, and we don't know when we're going to be recording a new one. So every podcast is different. Follow up with them. If you're reaching out to a podcaster and it's a not right now, that doesn't mean no. So follow them on social media, connect with them on LinkedIn, like them on YouTube, subscribe to their podcast, leave them a review, be in their world, and then continue to follow up. So if they say 6 to 9 months, follow up in 6 to 9 months. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What one lesson are you going to apply to your podcast guesting strategy? If you love these 10 lessons from 1,000 emails that we have sent to podcasters, then I know you would love jumping in on our Communication Queens program. Click below to get on the waitlist to learn how you can start profiting from guest podcasting, not only as a source of lead generation, but also profiting from your own podcast. Inside of Communication Queens, I teach you my 7-step framework so that all you need to do is set yourself up for success, show up to your interviews, stand out, share your story, serve, and sell. And then when you're ready, start your own podcast to even more multiply your income so that you start profiting from podcasting. The doors will be opening for Communication Queens soon, so jump in on the wait list, and I will see you inside Communication Queens. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. As always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now. Check out these videos next for more resources on how to profit from guest podcasting. Want to profit from podcasting, profit from guest podcasting so you stand out and are fearless and are bold. Waiting for the trash truck to pass by. Thursday's probably not the best day to record YouTube videos.